Here we go. Never will there be a situation where I'm 100% ready to go when I hit play, or record, rather, on this camera. So, if that's something that you're waiting for, keep on waiting, player. It ain't happening. It may be someday. I don't know. It's just the way my brain works. At any rate, welcome back to the It Bees Like That podcast. I'm your host, Chris. And today is, as I've done a couple of times, I've recorded an episode while riding some pretty big emotions and not uploaded said episodes to the channel, I think wisely. I don't know that I regret any of the things that I say in these episodes that I don't share. However, I've shared this sentiment before. I do believe that to use a platform like this to share the messages that I do, it is in my best interest as the deliverer to consider how these messages may impact people. Because I can't expect whoever to be impacted in the same way that I would be impacted by someone who looks like me delivering the messages that I do here. So, well, granted, there are many people, and I talk to them behind the scenes, who appreciate the energy, the passion, and the sentiment, and the way that I deliver my message. Like, I don't do a lot of sugarcoating. I think that to cover and rescue status quo and security and ego that way is pretty chicken shit, honestly. So I don't do a whole bunch of that. But I do want to make this message as receivable as possible for as many people as possible. So in hopes of doing that, I change some things around. One of the great things about being me and having the career that I do and having the privilege to occupy the spaces that I do is that I get the opportunity, I'm afforded the opportunity to highlight privilege, to call out, highlight, and question status quo, no matter who's occupying that space, and to challenge these things. Now, I grew up in Whatcom County, in Bellingham, so I have a uniquely qualified perspective regarding, and because I've spent my entire life here, so I've grown and watched the systems here in this county grow and change from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you know what I mean, to where we are now. And there's been a ton of progress. When I was a kid in the 80s, me and my dad were literally one of 3 black families in Bellingham. Surrounding areas in Whatcom County didn't have black people. It just wasn't the case. Now, of course, things are much, much different. And people come here from other places. And even if it's been 10, 15 years, they still don't know what it was like in Whatcom County and Bellingham being a sundown town. For those of you who aren't familiar with what a sundown town is, Google it, because we're not going to cover it today. But needless to say, people come here, however well-intentioned, thinking they understand the city of subdued excitement in its entirety when they really don't. They have an idea about the different cultures that survive here, whether they be indigenous cultures, farm culture, whatever. They think they have an idea, but they really don't. Now, am I an expert on this stuff? No. But what I have done is spent time on our reservations here in Whatcom County in the 80s and 90s. Because I'm from here. Like, I got to see a side of indigenous culture in Whatcom County that most people don't get to see, because they come at it from a few different approaches, either being a person who's invasive because they are some kind of legal authority, or invasive because they're some kind of government authority or part of some kind of governing body, or they're a person who just suffers from some weird white saviors and stuff and are invasive and don't even realize how intrusive they are. At any rate, again, my point is I've gotten to see so many aspects of Bellingham and Whatcom County. I'm from Bellingham back when Bellingham was a call to Ferndale was long distance. That's how long I've been in Whatcom County. Point is, I sit with this stuff, and being a person who's from here, and I have like I say, a uniquely qualified perspective on how things operate here. And people get their training here, academically or otherwise, and again, believe that they understand the culture here when they really don't. So then, I say that stuff to say, then it is my job, again, as a person who does, because I'm from here, like born and raised here, and being a person of color here, and growing up as a person of color here when there were not very many, I have a supremely different perspective than you do, than a lot of people do who are transplants to our city and county. Not to say that they aren't welcome. I'm just saying a lot of times, like, you just really need to do a lot more listening than you do speaking. You're not an expert, I guess is the point. And it's pretty insulting to have people who aren't from our city and county come in and offer advice and guidance to us when they don't really fully understand the culture. I hope that makes sense. So that is another reason why it is an honor for me to be in the position that I am, because my experience with all of this stuff is not like the experience of people who look like me who come here from other places, right? People who come here from other places who look like me might have an idea on how they're going to interact and point these things out, but it gets really confusing, right? It gets really, really confusing. Because one thing that can happen, and don't get me wrong, I love my city, but the one thing that can happen here is Bellingham and Whatcom County have a very, very unique way of saying, very subtle and very unique way, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't get it. You'll just be left feeling really confused and not really knowing where to turn for any kind of guidance or direction. I can help. There's a message for professionals of color. When you come here, you can make a phenomenally happy life for yourself, and you can build a great life here for you and your family. The requirement would be to essentially behave, right? And what do I mean by behave? I don't mean things like from antiquity where we're not allowed to look people in the eye and, you know, you have to walk on one side of the street and there's segregation. What I mean is, like, behave in ways that don't challenge the status quo, because people get comfortable. People get comfortable in their role as ally and want to highlight and acknowledge the privilege of other people and not highlight and acknowledge their own. And I mean, I get it. I understand the necessity for this because you want to protect the resource, right? Everybody has to make a living. So if you can carve something out for yourself and make it your own, even if that's sort of a fool's errand, because none of the things that we build in the community are for us personally, right? We can certainly benefit from these things because rising waters raise all ships, right? But they're not they don't belong to us, they belong to the community, right? So if we get stuck in a mindset that like, well, this is mine and I'm gonna protect it and I'm gonna curate these things and I'm gonna run this how best I see fit. Well, you're not even really from here. So that's kind of a presumptive position, right? And to gatekeep and dictate to the community that's indigenous to this area. And I don't mean just like indigenous people, like Native Americans. I mean like people who are native to this area. For you to come in and kind of gentrify systems and structures and stuff like that in that way, I think is highly invasive. I think it's highly egotistical. And again, that's part of my job, is to call this stuff out, wherever I see it. Now, sometimes this can be kind of difficult because two things can be true at the same time. The status quo can be maintained, and this is going to get some resistance, but the status quo can be maintained by quote unquote otherwise good people, or who otherwise seem to be good people. One might say, well, Chris, if they're actually a good person, then they would recognize their bolstering and propping up of the status quo. And I would say, yeah, most of the time, but sometimes maybe not. Because especially in communities this small, it can really turn into like an echo chamber. And everybody's listening to the same message, and it's just being repeated over and over and over by the same people to each other. And it takes someone with a fresh perspective, not necessarily someone who disagrees or who's just like inherently contrary, which I've been accused of being, which is not the case. My only goal is to hold true to the message, the people who espouse it, right? So in my last job, on the wall outside in huge letters for the world and everyone to see who cared to look, stuff about community action, right? And if what we're doing every day isn't in some way in line with that, then you can't feel good about coming in under a banner that says something like that if you're not really living up to it. So I hope I'm making sense when I say this, because I do feel misunderstood a lot, but I want people to really take a look at what I'm trying to do, because the work that I do for and in my community is for my community. And I mean just like Bellingham and Whatcom County. I really care about what happens to the people here. I really do. And sometimes I think that people get caught up on not necessarily my method, because our methods are generally the same. I think people get caught up on my delivery, and it isn't that my delivery is any harsher or any harder to digest by the populations that I serve, the people that I serve. I think it more has to do with, it really goes against the grain of the status quo. And what I know happens when I walk into a room is, a lot of time my reputation precedes me. And also, I make no bones about, if especially when it comes to equity in spaces, like if it seems to me that you're gatekeeping or, curating, and cherry picking, I'm going to call that out. And what's interesting is smart people realize quickly that I don't even necessarily have to call you out by name. I just have to call out the behavior in those spaces, and people will automatically start to look around. Well, like, is that taking place here? And one of the reasons why I know in services, since I've been in services, why my access has been limited is outside of the other obvious and more standard reasons for a professional of color is because of those things. Because I call out those standards and practices that maintain the status quo. And I've been successful at rooting some of these things out. You know, at least some of the bad actors anyway. And I don't mean like removing them from, like a position or anything, but, highlighting these things. And generally people, I think, want to do the right thing. So if the opportunity presents where they can do the right thing and also feign ignorance, under the larger umbrella of wanting to and caring for the community, and like that's their out, then I think that they'll take that bit of damage to the old ego and just kind of slide right in there easily. Because, I mean, those feelings, they abate relatively quickly. And if you're a smart person, then you'll lean into those opportunities. But some people don't. Some people, their pride just will not let them relent, and they will fight tooth and nail to protect their position because, again, they feel obliged somehow, that they should be obliged somehow, and that they have possession or like actual ownership over things that were meant to be and are meant to serve the community, not you personally. These things don't belong to us. I've started many things at respective jobs since I've been in services, and repeatedly had to tell people like, hey, no, I may have initiated this, but this doesn't belong to me. This belongs to all of these people who you see who are participating now. This belongs to all of them. There's no big I's and little U's. This is a collective voice. That was intentional, because if it's just mine, people can take something from one person, because one person fighting a 9-foot cyclops or a group of them, right? Like an agency or agencies, or, a group of people with power and influence, it's much easier to remove one person or remove something from one person than it is to remove a thing, especially a positive and constructive thing, from a group of people. So, like anything built for or meant to serve the community, the power and ownership should always be maintained and held by the people in that community. I believe that now, and I will always believe that, and I won't relent on that. And that opinion and position makes me really unpopular in certain circles, because people become accustomed to power and become accustomed to privilege, and they become accustomed to this idea of themselves in relation to the world about how good they are, when that was never supposed to be the point. And I would ask you, like, how good can you possibly imagine yourself to be if all you ever are is affirmed by the people in your direct environment? That's all. Like, I watch people really closely, and I see them intentionally go toward situations and people and circumstances which, A, they know they have a high likelihood of being successful, especially if there's any kind of contention there. Generally, bullies don't pick fights with people that there's a chance that they might lose, or a higher likelihood that they might lose, or an equal, that they win or lose. And, I think that part of it is human nature. We're inclined to lean into compliments and like-minded and like hive brain, hive mentality. Well, this is not good. This is not where progress lives. This is not where progress lives. You can't take something and hide it from the world and only share it with the people that you determine to be worthy and never let it grow and evolve. I'm sorry to tell you, but this is supposed to happen. The heralding of change doesn't look like you anymore. And we should embrace that. We should embrace the change. We should embrace that, maybe not chronologically, but by way of like just a respective age of a person, but more that like, yo, if you've been in a certain space for a long time, like the likelihood that you're getting close, that on your path, that you're closer to being a gray wolf, and your ideas, while progressive and aggressive and exciting and passionate here in the beginning of your journey, now you're at the end of your journey and you're at the beginning of ours, where our ideas now are what yours were at the beginning of your journey, at the beginning of ours. So now it is time for, I guess, the gray wolves to pass the torch and pass wisdom and experience and where these things apply. But also, it's time to pass room and platform. It's time to step down or step aside and out of the way of people with fresher eyes and fresher ideas and more experience, more real world experience with the issues at hand, right? Because I'm gonna tell you straight up, my life, my 45 years of life from birth to now is a sociological data and experience dream come true. I check all the boxes and I literally should not be here, but I am. I recognize that. So I have a purpose, and it isn't to play the sidelines, and it isn't to acquiesce to the status quo. What it most certainly is to highlight the status quo. What it most certainly is to call forward and invite people to accountability and to step into real change and to be a notice. Like, I'm a notification of what's coming. That's scary. I mean, I'm not talking shit. Like, I really do understand how that can be scary. I really do. And I don't want anyone, and this is not just this is humanity, right? I don't want anyone to feel like they've been pushed out of something that's so important to them. People, I mean, there's stuff that I can no longer do that I have to pass over to the new generation, right? Like, it doesn't mean that I'm not important anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't still have value. It just means that now it's time for a fresher, more energetic set of eyes, And one of the signals of that it's time to move is when you just become deadlocked in a perspective and you are right, like you're borderline fanatical on some shit. It's probably like if you when you're close to like the end of your changeability and adaptability, we really have to start asking ourselves, and I've gotten there in certain places, and I'm sure I'll get there, in my career in activism or whatever it might be, where we really have to sit down and ask ourselves, am I doing more harm than good? Am I taking up space that could be better utilized by a more youthful energy and a fresher perspective? These are hard questions, man. I get it, but they're necessary. They're necessary. And if we want the change that you really talk about, that we all really talk about, these are the kinds of questions, these are the conversations that have to be had. I mean, and I really, again, don't want to be I don't want my frustration to be misunderstood. But when it comes to people like me, that frustration that you see in the face of oppressive tactics, egos, manipulation, and obvious bureaucracy, a lot of that is because we are accustomed to being told no. Like you won't be afforded space to process that frustration because we know better for you than you do. We've been doing this longer. I know we are not from your community or communities. We've not had the experiences that you have, but we have these other experiences that, according to the status quo and dominant culture, we're better equipped based on training that we've received to dictate to you better for your life than you can. I mean, look at you and look at us. That's literally the message. It's just crazy. And we become more frustrated, which is a zero-sum game for us because of the things that I just stated, but also it's an opportunity for dominant culture to say, well, we're right. They are emotional, opinionated, aggressive. I would say that contrary to these other things, like being unfairly maligned, and the oppressive and presumptive nature of the systems designed against us, the more substantive thing, the more salient point would be to recognize that we want we want the same things that everyone else does, which is just to live in peace and be left alone, to determine life for ourselves. That's it. Stripping all that other shit away, that's literally what anybody wants. Any reasonably minded person, no matter what race, gender, creed, whatever, religion, doesn't matter. That's what most reasonably minded people want, is just to be left alone to determine life for themselves. That's it. But it's so hard for people to dig in deep and recognize and root out that maintenance of status quo spirit that they have, because they've been fighting the good fight for so long. I mean, look at all the boxes that I check. I may not be from this community, but look at all these other boxes that I check as an ally. Look at my credentials. Look at what I've done for your people. I don't know. I do know that I'll continue to live according to the truest messages of my heart, which are, do my best to accept good from any source, which is a challenge sometimes, and to lean into my purpose, which is spread experience, strength, and hope, and do my damnedest to remain a grateful, honorable, humble, respectful, and honest man until I die, and lift hella weights, and eat all the foods, and eat all the donuts. That'd be it. You didn't do it on the way in, do it on the way out. Hit that like, subscribe, post notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the cool, fun, wacky, and insightful shit we talk about here on the ABs Like That podcast. Peace, y'all.